Wakanda Forever is a movie that has a lot of problems, but there was one that bothered me above all others. But first, because we like to inject at least some positivity on this channel, I'm going to say that this couldn't have been easy. I hear writer-director Ryan Coogler already had the script for Black Panther 2 mostly done by the time of Chadwick Boseman's unexpected death. So considering this is being released just over 2 years later, it's kind of a miracle this movie exists at all. I feel though, for reasons I'm going to go over, that they should have delayed it by another 2 years. But they weren't going to leave that cash cow alone after only one milking, were they? And considering all the problems the MCU has been having lately with disappointing, unfinished and/or cheap-looking visuals, this is a very good-looking film. There are the same problems with CGI, specifically during the fight scenes, but not nearly to the same extent, and the costuming and other practical aspects more than make up for it. I also want to praise the acting. Angela Bassett gets to go full Queen Mother mode here, and after all, this is a woman who has Queen Mother coming out of her pores, and she didn't really get that much of a chance to shine in the first movie. Winston Duke is on form as M'Baku, having firmly made that character his own. Lupita Nyong'o is top-notch as always, though they didn't give her character all that much to do. And Letitia Wright does a pretty decent job, again with the tools she's given. And that's pretty much all the nice things I have to say. This is a mess of a movie. It is so long and you feel every minute of that time. There always seems to be movement on screen, but often very little of substance is actually happening. It's like they're telling you something big and important is going on, but the feeling behind it is non-existent. Bar the feelings brought about by the main thing I took issue with. So let's get into that. I was against recasting T'Challa before. I really was. I thought Chadwick Boseman was just too perfect in that role. You can't have anyone else. He is T'Challa now. But recent projects coming out of Hollywood, the cesspool with which I share my name, have made me change my mind. But first, let's talk about why Boseman was so good in that role. He was a standout in Civil War, and that is a feat because there is a lot of interesting and important things going on in this movie. The thing that cinched it for me, though, was the fact that I looked at him and thought, he has kind eyes. As a fan of the Black Panther comics, there were 3 things I wanted from any actor who was going to play him. He had to be regal, he had to be wise, and he had to have kind eyes. And Boseman got a hat trick on that one. So I understand why they were reluctant to recast him. Movie studios take lessons from their successes, but they take bigger ones from their failures, and when it comes to Disney's decision to not recast T'Challa, I blame Star Wars for this. I promise you that's going to make sense in a minute. Specifically, I blame The Last Jedi, Solo, and The Mandalorian respectively. Solo, who recast an iconic character, was a box office disappointment. The Last Jedi was a very divisive film, primarily for its portrayal of an icon, Luke Skywalker, and The Mandalorian fixed that for the fans by giving them the look they always wanted. Young, badass, dignified, in his prime. This was a moment that held such power in the minds of fans that they literally wept at seeing their hero again. Now, this is not me pouring scorn on that sentiment because believe me, I understand. But studios take lessons from these things, and this was the wrong one in my opinion. That heroes you love being portrayed in the way you remember them is what pleases audiences. And yes, there are bad takes on characters out there, but revamping and retelling stories is the way you keep beloved media fresh. Just look at Batman and all the incredibly different versions of this character we have, a great number of them beloved and many fans having a fondness for more than one at the same time. But now Disney have it in their heads that different portrayals won't draw in the money they want. I have said previously that I'm an extended material girl. I may have started with The Mandalorian, but I rarely consume the mainstream Star Wars content, and Despite believing that the original trilogy are the superior films, my true fondness is for the prequels, and my interest lies in the prequel and Old Republic eras. So Luke Skywalker, though I recognise and respect his importance as a cultural icon, is not personally important to me in the slightest. But that doesn't mean I feel nothing for him, and to see Luke, young, affectionate, kind, sparky Luke, reduced to this, a lifeless, if technologically impressive rendering, is very sad. And we're seeing this in Marvel properties too. Logan was the perfect ending to both Wolverine and Professor X's stories. Heartbreaking, tragic, meaningful endings wiped out for the purpose of drawing in audiences with the appearances of faces they love. I am not excited to see Hugh Jackman again. I want to see someone else don the Wolverine mantle. I want to see what someone else can bring to it. And that brings us back to Black Panther. I know Chadwick Boseman was a rising star that injected everything into that character necessary to make him an icon, and no one can take away that impact, but you're telling me that there are no other young rising stars out there? No young, talented, charismatic black actors who could bring the same level of regality and charisma to this character? Now, I get that that kind of thing is rare. I've said before that in order to portray superheroes, you can't just be a good actor. You have to have that special, indescribable thing that makes the audience just look at you and believe you are a hero. I'm not saying that's easy to find, but you're telling me there's no one else out there who could do that? This is why this movie should have been delayed. They should have delayed it, allowed people a bit more time to adjust to the idea, allowed more work to be done on the script. And in the meantime, we could have filled that spot with something else, like a TV series, Tales from Wakanda or something like that. Something that doesn't focus on the royal family and instead shows the lives of ordinary Wakandan people and how they feel about their country opening up despite living under isolationist policies for so long. Because, make no mistake, it was the right thing to do opening up the country and sharing resources. But of course there are going to be consequences. Sometimes, often, it costs to do the right thing. That way, we get more of the Wakandan cash cow, but we don't need T'Challa right at this moment. And then there's the thing that made me want to make this video, and that's the fact that not just T'Challa, but Chadwick Boseman's death is the emotional linchpin of this movie. And there are two schools of thought regarding this. One is the fact that writer-director Ryan Coogler worked with this man. Like, they worked together to bring the Black Panther movie and the character of T'Challa to the big screen. And there is just the simple fact that a man wanted to pay tribute to a deceased colleague through his art.
Chad was very much our artistic partner. I would spend time with him, just he and I, talking about like where we would want to see the story go, how much he admired the other characters and the actors that portrayed them.
And there's also the fact that the family were apparently heavily consulted on this and they were communicated with throughout the entire process. So if that is true, then I do understand why people do see this as a moving, respectful tribute. But there is the inescapable fact that this is a multi-million-dollar movie featuring an incredibly profitable intellectual property, owned by a multi-billion-dollar company. And that brings with it a certain amount of inexcusable tastelessness. Now, there are writers and directors who pay tribute to deceased people in their movies, but that usually takes the form of either something as simple as a mention in the end credits, or subtly injected into the story. But the problem with this is that not only T'Challa, but Chadwick Boseman's death is the main emotional linchpin of the movie. The movie is spent grieving him. Money is being made off of grieving him. So the fact that the emotional core of your story and the emotional reaction you're going to get from your audience doesn't come from the story itself, but a real person's real death. I just don't see how that's excusable. And there's also the fact that T'Challa died of an illness. Once again, very closely relating this to the real-life death of a person whose death affected a great number of people who are going to go see this movie. And on top of that, there are serious story and lore problems with the fact that he died of an illness, because he is the king of Wakanda, who canonically has cryogenic freezing technology, so they couldn't have frozen him until they either found a cure for what ailed him or were able to recreate the heart-shaped herb. You're telling me, from a lore perspective, nothing could have been done for T'Challa, but the lore problems are the least of it for this as a creative decision, and more distastefully, a business decision. And again, there's just something very wrong about real people, real artists who really worked with Chadwick Boseman, genuinely expressing their grief at losing him, now being used as essentially promotional material for a multi-million-dollar film. I don't see how this is excusable. Again, I understand why people disagree with me. Art is a great way to express your grief. And if this movie and its themes of grief helped you in your life, then yeah, I get why it touched you in an important way. Because one of the scenes in the movie where I felt genuine emotion just from the core of the story is a moment when Shuri is just sitting alone, softly crying, thinking about her brother and contemplating the responsibility he left her. That was it. Just good acting and a silent moment of a sister mourning her brother. So this movie is not emotionally empty. It's just the fact that a real person's real death is being used as the emotional linchpin to get audiences to care about this film. I just can't reconcile that. And there's also one other little thing I wanted to talk about, and that is the fact that people are lobbying for T'Challa to be recast. And apparently Chadwick Boseman's brother, Derek Boseman, said that even though Chadwick never outright expressed his wishes regarding it, he feels as though it's what his brother would have wanted. A mantle he helped create being passed on to someone else who can keep the character alive and bring their own interpretation to it. Because that is basically the immortal lifeblood of comic book characters, the fact that they are passed on from artist to artist, from writer to writer, and in the extended media, from actor to actor. And the petition has a really great quote that lays this out very well. If Marvel Studios removes T'Challa, it would be at the expense of the audiences, especially black men and boys who saw themselves in him. This also includes the millions of fans who were inspired by this character as well. The number one way to kill a legend is to stop telling their story. I completely agree. So I haven't talked about the movie all that much, and that's because I don't have all that much to say. But let's start with the biggest disappointment, which was Namor.
But my enemies call me Namor.
I was actually pretty excited for Namor because, for those of you who watched my DCAMU series, you'll know that I have some real beef with the character of Aquaman. And Namor is pretty much the answer to those problems. He's kind of like, what if Aquaman were actually realistic? In terms of the royalty aspect of his character, of course. You know what I said about charisma? Well, no offense to this actor, he did okay, but he just doesn't exude that level of charisma needed for a role like this. He's definitely not the first villain in the MCU to suffer from this problem, but yeah, it just wasn't a very gripping performance. And the writing, oh god. The personal disappointment for me in the first Black Panther movie was that the political maneuvering was pretty simplistic. We are dealing with royalty, a coup, and potentially World War III here. Why is this so simplistic? Still, at least they had a clear-cut trajectory of how the Wakandan political system works, how the villain circumvents it, and how the hero gets it back. Simplistic, but effective. This Wakanda versus not Atlantis is just a pile of nonsense. I wasn't expecting Game of Thrones level maneuvering here, but give me something. I would have to see the movie again to go through all the ridiculousness that happened, but there are a few things that stood out to me. One is when Namor kidnaps the princess of the nation he's trying to coerce into fighting alongside him. Okay. Could be used as decent leverage. Cripple your enemy politically by removing one of its essential leaders, lower the morale of the enemy by taking one of its figureheads, or even develop a relationship and try and convince her to see things your way. And I think this is what he was trying to do, but God, dude, just be smart about it. He takes her to his kingdom in a manner that fully reveals to her where it is and how it works, giving her incredibly valuable information should she ever escape. And not only that, he gives her his mother's necklace, and this is what allows her to recreate the purple heart-shaped herb they lost in the first movie and become Black Panther. What? Again, I've only seen this movie once, so please God tell me if I'm missing something, but Christ. And there is a moment in this movie that seriously had me laughing, and that is, after he has seriously hurt and angered Wakanda, he basically says, I'll come back in a week and see if you've reconsidered joining me. Oh, excellent military strategy, Your Majesty. Just give your enemy the time they need to regroup.
This will lull him into a sense of full security and win the greatest victory since the Winchester flower arranging team beat Harrow by 12 sore bottoms to 1.
Oh, and there's the creation of the vibranium detecting device. You think, throughout Wakanda's thousands of years of history, no one thought, we have this incredibly valuable and rare resource. Maybe we want to check if anyone else has that resource. Just in case we're ever in the position where they may be potentially able to use it against us in the future. You're telling me that this is the first time in their history that anyone has thought to look for more vibranium. It was literally delivered to them from the sky in a meteor. They didn't think, maybe that wasn't the only meteor that dropped in these thousands upon thousands of years of human history. In terms of Riri's character, I don't have that much to say about her. She is significantly less insufferable than her comic book counterpart, but that's not saying much. And the trade-off to that is that there isn't really that much to her, which is a shame, because I know this is Shuri's movie, but if you look at Civil War, that movie was about Captain America and Iron Man and the political and personal dispute between them, but still, they managed to give T'Challa not only a great introduction, but a great character arc as well. So they don't really do anything interesting with Riri, she's just there. And there's also that scene with the Dora Milaje yet again circumventing international law by breaking into a young girl's home and telling her that she will be getting kidnapped whether she likes it or not. Our heroes, ladies and gentlemen! Okay, good stuff, good stuff. M'Baku is great, mostly because his appearances are the only parts of the film where you feel like you're not dead. And as I've said, Winston Duke has definitely made that character his own, even if he and Nakia were given virtually nothing to do. And I'm struggling, guys. This movie was a struggle to get through. The things I do have any inclination to talk about are just the military and political nonsense that happens in this story. So yeah, maybe I'll do a proper critical analysis when it comes out on streaming. Please tell me if that's something you want me to spend my time on. But yeah, guys, I'm I'm done. And I want to apologize if I've been significantly more maudlin in this video than I have been in others, but there is a specific reason for that. And I've detailed before how I got into comics, and it was mostly through my dad. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I got into the show X-Men Evolution, and one day, I don't know if I either talked to my dad about it or he just came in one day and saw me watching it, but he said, "You know that's based on a comic, right?" And I was like, "Tell me more." And he had all these old Thor comics. He also had Spider-Man comics too, but I was never really that big a fan of Spider-Man, sorry. And it wasn't like instant love, but my love for the medium grew steadily over the years as I discovered more and more. And when the MCU started, I was the only person my dad knew who was into this sort of thing. So when a movie came out, we'd go together and it became our father-daughter thing. And that is what makes this particularly sad for me, because I've been petering in and out of the MCU since Phase 4 started, but I am genuinely concerned at the idea that these movies will get so mediocre and so insufferable that I won't want to go see them anymore. That would be very, very sad for me. And a lot of this is to do with how Disney is handling these characters. If you think about Endgame and how, despite its problems, it wrapped up over a decade's worth of storytelling, giving two of its most beloved characters incredibly satisfying endings, and how they left at the perfect point where they had told all the stories they needed to tell, but at a point also where we would still miss them. And that being done in over a decade's worth of storytelling, at least in the medium of film, is pretty much unprecedented. So not only are they getting rid of, and in cases other than this one, ignoring characters who haven't yet had the chance to have their stories fully told, but they are also resurrecting characters who have already had their stories told perfectly, ruining said endings in the process. Speaking of which, I'm going to get back to working on that MCU Daredevil video I promised. That one will be much more in-depth. I far prefer to do video essays rather than more reaction-based reviews, because I feel like it gives me a chance to get my thoughts more in order and puts a certain amount of distance between myself and the project to the point where emotions regarding it aren't so high. But I really felt as though I had something to say about Disney's refusal to recast beloved characters, because it's getting really annoying, as is the blatant fan pandering. But not only that, I grew up on the MCU. It is personally very important to me, despite the fact that I almost entirely read DC comics these days, and the idea of losing that is sad. It's very sad. So yeah, I will be back with a video that will hopefully be much better than this one, but I hope you had fun. Dear God, I hope someone did.